See if you could see this. I'm not sure if it's gonna work. Um, can you guys see that? Okay. Woohoo. Yeah, the funny thing, Maribel, is, the more stressed you get, the more stuff doesn't work. Hey, Cuff You. Hey, Maribel. Hey, Olga. Hey, Wheels of Life. So this is gonna be my first time ever doing, this type of, thing. We're not even on the right slide. Um, it's it was supposed to be like a 30-minute, like, kind of PowerPoint, but it turned into this massive thing. And so I think we're going to go for about an hour today and just kind of talk about family annihilators, kind of as a lecture, more than just like a Chris Watts kind of thing. Um, the whole idea of what I've been trying to figure out is, can you predict this type of event? And um, I have come to the conclusion that it's unlikely that it's something that you can foresee happening. The only thing that you can predict is the domestic violence portion of it. You just don't know for sure if it's ever going to go beyond that. Like a physical altercation, maybe somebody gets a black eye or a bloody nose, or somebody, gets knocked unconscious, but, that lethal threat is still there regardless. Um, if there's any kind of domestic violence, that is this what happened to Chris Watts. This is a possibility for anybody in those kind of circumstances. And that's the whole reason why I've been kind of researching the family annihilators. Um, so the family annihilator. This is a psychological and forensic comprehensive analysis. I thought that was a good title, but YouTube did not think it was a good title. So, predicting family annihilation. Is this a myth or reality? What we do know is we can identify motives, profiles, and patterns of family killers like Chris Watts, John List, and more. And I'm going to kind of try to keep an eye on the chat, guys. It's a little bit hard to flip back and forth when I got to share my whole screen, but I'm just looking again. Cuff You says, especially with Chris Watts. I mean, he was a normal, pretty honestly boring, nice guy. And he was actually likable. Nobody can understand what made him think he could get away with what he did. This is true. With Chris Watts specifically, not every family annihilator has a violent past, but there would be other identifiers. In his specific scenario, those stressors are, it isn't physical abuse, isn't the red flag. It's all the other stressors. And so I'm going to kind of go through some of this if I can figure out. Yeah, see, this just turned into such a huge project. And I think I could actually almost write a textbook on this topic. As much as I've read about it, wrote about it, I've got like at least 12 different versions of this. But family annihilation is the killing of an entire family by one of its members. It represents one of the darkest and most perplexing forms of violence. These are rare events, and ostensibly loving parent, overwhelmingly the father, murders their parent and child or children, often culminating in the perpetrator's own suicide. And we know that Chris hadn't considered this, but other family annihilators start out with that in mind before they murder their entire family. The notion is almost unimaginable, even given that your family is typically what you live for. Um, Yet history and forensic records show that it does happen, and it is exceptionally uncommon as far as murders go. Um, to put its rarity in perspective, even under extreme stressors like divorce, financial ruin, um, custody battles, more than 99.7% of families do not experience any lethal violence. In the UK, for example, there's only 71 cases of family annihilations that were identified over the last few years. I think 30, maybe decades, if I remember right. I got a slide on this. Hold on. Um, where is it? So we're gonna skip through this stuff that I worked really hard on to get to where I'm at. Um, we'll just go back to some of these slides. I know I've got this slide in here. See, this is the average number of family annihilations each year, and then I've also got the average number of cases over the last 30 years in various different parts of the world. Um, so I think this is important because if you think about how many murders there are in a year, and I don't know why I didn't look this statistic up, but there's, let me just look it up real quick, actually. Average number of murders per year in USA. Just, I don't want to guess what the number is. Yeah, 21,000. That's what the first answer from Google is. So out of 21,000 murders each year, we're looking at about 15 family annihilations. So that is extremely a small number in comparison to the average numbers of murders. So it's really important that we know this for many different reasons. Um, you, you know, you can't just think, oh, well, this wasn't that bad. He just slapped me, or she just like, you know, threw a knife at me or something. You can't think like that, because even if it's like less than 1% of all murders, you know, you got to consider family annihilations. We see it all the time, and if you think of some cases, categorizing these kinds of cases isn't always cut and dry either. If you look at Jodi Arias, she murdered her partner. They didn't have a family yet, but she kind of suffered the same stressors. That was a toxic relationship, so there's other dynamics, but it's very similar, and it's kind of hard to differentiate these kinds of things. So I just want to say hello to a couple people here. Wheels of Life, that I already see you were here. If not, I'm glad you're here to hang out. And as Asmal Weed, welcome. And if you guys have questions, make sure to leave some questions for me, and I'll try to. It's kind of hard because I can't use the PowerPoint the way I want to. And I don't have this whole thing memorized. I'm like flipping through documents here, and I can't see my actual screen with the chat on it. So just ask your questions, and then I'll check every so often and try to answer them the best that I can. So where was I? So yeah, these are the average number of cases each year. So you can see the USA isn't got the highest number, first of all, which is kind of surprising. And once again, I don't know if these statistics are you know, if they're measuring the same types of murders in every single country, because in every state, in every county, all these things get tallied up differently, stuff gets miscategorized. There's all kinds of reasons for these numbers to not be, completely accurate. So, yeah, in the US, there's roughly 10 to 20 familicide incidences each year. Um, and as I said, that's exceedingly rare, especially when you think of the number of murders. And then if you look at the entire numbers of families, even that's even smaller number because there's millions of families. Um, these crimes are statistical outliers. Um, and they're shockingly tragic. The nature of them is just, it there isn't anyone who could like hear about one of these crimes and not cringe. It um it compels, deep psychological and criminological inquiry. People just want to know why. Um, So today, my main goal here is to dissect the phenomenon of family annihilators through multiple lenses: the psychological, the psychiatric, the criminological, and even the forensic, and ask whether it's possible to detect or predict such extreme violence. Um, so we're going to examine some theories. I'm going to illustrate some of the typologies of these perpetrators, consider real case studies. I specifically want to talk about Chris Watts and John List. And we will emphasize that these cases are exceptions. And the goal, I guess, is for everyone to glean some insights. And hopefully, you can prevent somebody from going through something like this. Um, I know I've heard many times people say, well, if you're in a bad situation, why don't you just leave? That is a whole different dynamic that it's hard to break people out of that cycle. And when they're in it, they don't see it the way that outsiders see it. All right. So moving on. This is kind of we're gonna show a couple of different cases here: Chris Watts, John List, Scott Peterson, Andrea Yates. These are all family annihilators, and I've got them listed here by, what their main motive was. And let's see, can't see my screen here. Yeah, we've got the psychological column that indicates the significant psychological motives, and the forensic criminological indicate um, different patterns of why these crimes were committed. So the classic definitions of family annihilator, this term was coined by, what was his first name? His last name is Dietz. He's a psychologist, and I think I got his, well, hold on. I've got it written down somewhere. I just got to get to it. He's got an odd name. And I can't find it. I know it's on one of my slides later on, but it's pretty far down the road. Anyway, I guess, well, This is a little harder than I expected. Um, and of course, yeah, I'll just have to kind of go with it. I can't remember the guy's name. It's something. It starts with a F, and it's very hard to pronounce. Also, um, so family annihilations also um, are distinct from serial murder, which involves multiple events over time, and from spree killings or other mass murders targeting strangers. Family annihilators are unique. And we already looked at that one. So, why would a parent or a partner, often perceived as normal, even loving family members, slaughter those they care about most? The psychology offers several, sometimes overlapping explanations. We will explore a few key themes: personality disorders, especially narcissistic and antisocial traits, mood disorders like depression, often tied to suicidal intent, psychotic or paranoid states, and broader issues of masculine identity and control. This part I don't think we're going to get to today, um, but it is a huge part of this like overall discussion. Um, think of each perspective as a different lens to understand the extreme mindset of a family annihilator. So I don't know if you guys have heard of cluster B disorders. Yeah, did one of you guys know who that guy was? Park Dietz. I don't. Was it Park? No, I think it was something. Um, you know what? Here, I'll just skip ahead and I'll find out. I've got it in here. This is him. Yeah, Park Dietz. It's the other guy, the next guy. This guy testified at the Jeffrey Dahmer case trial, and the other gentleman's name is probably the one. This guy, yeah, this is the one I was trying to remember his name. Um, yes, but thanks, over. Yeah, you're right. It was Park. Hey, Maria, welcome. Um, so I'm just kind of looking through the chat here. Um, yeah, Maria, we're just kind of going through. I guess it's kind of like a lecture, and I'm not a lecturer. I don't really know how to do these. I'm trying to um, kind of just go with it, but I've got a lot of information, and it's all good information. Um, but I've been personally trying to figure out family annihilators and see if there's a way to figure out how to predict these kinds of events, to differentiate them from other forms of domestic violence, ones that don't end in lethal violence. And that's my main goal. Um, so far, we've just kind of talked about a few things. Um, Cuff says, so genuine question. Until NK, can y'all tell me what Chris did that made you think he was a narcissistic in your opinion? That's a good question because I didn't actually think he was a narcissist. And I still kind of don't. I think he has a lack of empathy, but I think that he understands empathy. And I've talked about dark empathy several times, and I kind of get the cold shoulder on those videos because people don't get what the difference between empathy and dark empathy is. Um, you know, psych, and all of these cluster B disorders, they lack empathy. And when you think of Chris Watts, he seems to be the type of person with who at least understands empathy. He answers questions. He does things that he thinks people want him to do because it makes him feel good, or makes him appear to seem good. The whole idea with the empathy, not having it but understanding it, is kind of confusing, I think. Hey, Lauren, how's it going? But yeah, antisocial doesn't mean quiet and withdrawn. If that's because I know a lot of people refer to antisocial as, oh, I'm antisocial. That means I don't go out and do things. That's not what antisocial actually is. The disorder is basically all of these things. They have, entitlement, self-centered, lack of empathy. They don't have normal feelings. They don't act like a normal person. That's what antisocial is. Borderline personality disorder and histrionic personality disorders are extremely hard to understand. Um, Borderline is like, you just have to imagine, I guess, like a clingy, like crazy person. That's kind of borderline. They're very intelligent. They understand everything, and then they're bizarre. I think we've mentioned borderline before, and we talked about like Basic Instinct, those kinds of movies. Um, his histrionic, I always have to look it up because it's a lot like other personality disorders, but it has a little bit of a different um, it's characterized by excessive emotionality and attention-seeking behavior. So histrionic is you know those overly flirty type people, but I mean it could be other types of attention-grabbing things. Um, and it doesn't always have to be things they grab attention in a good way. They could be disruptive. They could be having like a big shouting match in a Walmart or something. But they crave that attention. They have to have that attention. um, and borderline personality, I'm also grabbing the definition. If I had a book, I could probably find it easier, because I don't trust a lot of this crap online. Borderline personality disorder affects the way people feel about themselves and other, making it hard to function. So that's what I mean by the intense relationships with the clinginess. They build their identity around somebody else um, in very unhealthy ways. There's an impulsiveness that involves having extreme emotions and acting or doing things without thinking about them first. Um, the antisocial personality disorder um, is a long-standing pattern of behavior that violates societal norms. So when most people think of antisocial, they're thinking about the guy that's quiet, doesn't want to hang out, you know. Um, but the big difference is that it's the actual personality disorder. Um, it is a pattern, not just like a one day thing. This is over a long period of time. It's a pattern of behavior that violates societal norms and the rights of others. Individuals with this personality disorder lack empathy, remorse, and guilt. Their actions can lead to significant interpersonal and legal issues. This disorder is prevalent in males, and often associated with a history of conduct disorder since childhood. Um, so, I know people, and everyday life, they talk about antisocial a lot. They also talk about narcissistic a lot. And I think they're very misrepresented, especially when you're talking about actual clinical diagnosis of something like that, because everyone is narcissistic. It is a human trait. Everyone is a little bit narcissistic. It's the people with the personality disorder that they just don't operate in the same way. And let me just pull an actual definition of that also, because I think it's very hard to diagnose a narcissistic personality disorder. When I took abnormal psychology back in like 20 years ago, that was the one thing my professor said, was that you can't diagnose narcissistic personality disorder, and you can't treat it because people with narcissistic personality disorder don't believe they have it and don't want help. But they have this inflated sense of self-importance, superiority. They think they're better than everyone. So, a lot of people are narcissistic and don't have that personality disorder. Um, you know, and I mean, if you start reading through this list, it's going to seem like, hey, I have that, I have that, I have that. But it's, um, when it gets diagnosed, there's a lot of other factors that have to come into play. I'm not a doctor. I can't diagnose this stuff, but I do know that, just reading off a list and checking a box isn't going to work to diagnose something like this. Um, but the grandiosity, the need for admiration, the lack of empathy, the entitlement, um, exploiting people, taking advantage of others, using, your knowledge of empathy, even if you don't feel it, to gain something, to, manipulate a situation, that taking advantage of others to achieve your own personal goals. There's a high level of envy often um, in these individuals, believing that they got to be better than everyone else. But you got to remember, competitive nature is not doesn't make you a narcissist. Um, if I mean, this is I don't know. I don't know a good way to explain how to describe what narcissistic personality disorder is and what everybody is talking about on TikTok about when they talk about narcissistic personality disorder. They say, "Oh, you might be with a narcissistic person if you go through this, this, and this." And you could, but that doesn't mean that they're going to actually, if they saw a doctor, and most of them would not, but if they did, would actually be diagnosed as this. And then I would bet, even if somebody was clinically diagnosed, they can go to another doctor who might not believe that he has the same diagnosis. These are just labels that doctors use to kind of identify what's happening in a person, and then they can try to treat it either with medication or, I guess just learn the, like, what's the opposite of medication for psychological treatments? The Oh man, I know those. I'm not sure what I'm talking about here, but I'm going to get into some of the comments while I think about that. But there's some more practical ways that you can, change a behavior in a person rather than medication, is what I'm basically trying to say. But hey, Molly, I'm glad you made it. I'm kind of going through this presentation. It's more like a lecture. It's not really about anyone specific like I normally do. So I'm unable to pull up my actual PowerPoint, which is funny, but I've got it up in Canva, so it's kind of working. So I'm just looking back through some of the comments here. Cuffyu says, so my understanding that you think Chris exhibited those behaviors. I don't think Chris exhibited anything. Chris was very good at looking very normal, but his internal workings, that's a whole nother story. We know that he murdered somebody. We know that he had an internal, there was some internal conflict going. We don't know exactly what was happening, but we do know that we can see how his mother treated him. We can see how his wife treated him, and we can see a lot of dynamics, and we can kind of guess what was happening. I personally think that he was a passive aggressive, and he was quiet. He was the quiet manipulative type. So that's just what I see. It's not a diagnosis or anything, but that's what I get from him when I see him talking, when I hear him talking. There's just a few things that we can see, and it's very hard to use those things to actually diagnose somebody. We can understand him a little bit, knowing his family dynamics, the relationship with his mother and father, is the relationship with his wife. We know he had a secret relationship with another woman. We know those things now. And we also saw him lying to people publicly on the news. Like, that's a whole nother level of something in his personality that most people don't have. Most people couldn't stand up on that porch and lie like he did. That proves that he has some sort of lack of empathy to me, because he did it with a straight face. It was just over the next few days how the police kept coming by, and he kept having to explain more and more, that he started to get a little bit nervous and a little bit more nervous every time, until he finally cracked. One of my videos that I did on Chris Watts, I was just mentioning this, and it was basically I compared him to Ted Bundy. Would Chris Watts have killed again after he killed this first time? And that took me down this whole rabbit hole of his lack of empathy, and I researched empathy so much that I came across this new term that's not in the DSM. What is it? The DSM-5 now or something. The diagnostic tool that doctors use to label illnesses, mental health issues. But dark empathy is this new kind of pop psychology term for somebody who's able to fully understand how to use empathy, even though they don't feel it. They don't have those actual feelings of remorse. They don't have those feelings that, oh, you just had your pet died. Oh, I'm so sorry. And actually feel sorry. They know how to say the right words, but they don't feel them the same way. And they can also use those feelings of what they expect other people to feel to manipulate situations. And it's really a complicated thing. And once you start trying to figure out how the brain works, it's almost impossible to understand anything. Every time there's you start to understand it, then you get a new term introduced into everything, and it changes everything because that new word describes something better. And I mean, that's why they update the DSM, to include new things so people can understand um, things better. They'll all, those are the cluster B disorders. They're all essentially the same thing, but they have various different, like, um, I don't know. They're very, very similar, and they have some additional things that make them one thing or the other. Um, Maribel says, living 3 hours from parents, working as a mechanic. No one knows his personal life, including Cindy. That is true. She only knows what he told her and what she wanted to believe whenever he told her something. And Cuffew says dissociative fog, fugue. Dissociative fugue is a rare psychiatric condition that involves sudden change in behavior. Yeah, the fugue state. When I think of that, I don't know. It reminds me of Breaking Bad. When Walt goes, he pretends to be in a fugue state. He walks into a grocery store in his underwear. But drugs can induce a fugue state. Lack of sleep could also do that. But let me read the rest of this. Dissociative fugue. Fugue is a rare psychiatric condition that involves sudden change in behavior. People experiencing this temporary state may forget their identity in the past and may even create a new identity. So I have heard of this. I don't know if I've ever seen that. And I don't think that Chris went into a fugue state when he murdered his family, if that's kind of where you're going with that. But I haven't done a lot of research into these dissociative episodes, but I know about them. I've heard of them before. I think they used to be called a psychotic break, those kind of things where you just kind of like, yeah. But let's continue, or I'm going to be talking about these disorders forever. So here's an example. Forensics experts analyzing Chris Watts, the Colorado man who murdered his pregnant wife and his two daughters in 2018, have described him as exemplifying a psychopathic antisocial personality. Watts wanted a fresh start with a new lover and viewed his family as obstacles or burdens to be eliminated. And I know everybody's seen the Dr. Phil episode, but Dr. Phil even says that he believes if he can kill his family and make it seem like someone else did it, he's purging himself of an intolerable burden. Dr. Phil said that, and it's kind of, I kind of made it sound more like a sentence there, but the killer's identity. So with family annihilators, and the reason why, if you don't know who this man is, this is Murtaugh. What is his first name? Oh my goodness. So I didn't write down everything when I was making these. This man murdered his family. He was a lawyer, I think a prosecutor, and his family was all lawyers. They were very well respected people in their community, but he had been embezzling money or doing something, and he was about to get caught. And he couldn't live with the idea of being caught and being labeled, anything other than what he's always been labeled. And so that's what this is. This is another trait of family annihilators. The killer's identity is so grandiose and fragile. Rather than lose face or endure life as a rejected man, the narcissistic annihilator would rather destroy his entire familial world. Alex, thank you guys. I wish I could see the comments while I'm doing I can't turn the page from this page. Let's see. Cuffy says, y'all, my whole family called me a vampire. I never sleep. Is it very late where you guys are? I tried to do this as early as I could. Maribel asks, does anyone know if the other son, Buster, was supposed to be there? I don't recall. Am I putting everybody to sleep? Because, I've always wondered if I would be like a good professor or something, but I guess maybe not. Yeah, I'm just boring. I'm sorry, guys. But let me get back to this, my actual document. And okay, so we talked about the cluster B stuff. In cases like these, the narcissistic rage may be a trigger, a profound blow to a predator's ego. Say a partner's infidelity or intention to leave can unleash a disproportionate fury. The killer's identity is so grandiose and fragile that a family breakup becomes an unacceptable humiliation. So rather than lose face or endure a life being rejected, the narcissistic annihilator would rather destroy, murder his whole family. One study notes that an incredible sense of entitlement in narcissism, the entitlement to take life, that among many perpetrators, they assume the ultimate godlike authority over the fates of their family members. This mindset aligns with criminologist Neil Websdale, who describes it as a livid, coercive type, deeply angry, controlling men who cannot stand their control slipping away. Let's see. Cuffew says, see, that is one thing Chris mentioned to NK. They is that Shanann would take the girls and he would never see them again. See, this is just another example of another stressor. Because we know what Chris did, we can see these things come out a little easier than we would before they happened. But I fully believe that thinking about that could have been part of those, whatever triggered him to annihilate his family. These people usually have histories of this coercive control and domestic violence. As far as I know, Chris Watts didn't. Other family annihilators like Chris Coleman, I don't think he was had any kind of domestic violence stuff either. Same with John List. He was actually a very loving father while he was a father, and he wasn't the abusive type. But these types view that murder as a final act of dominance. That whole, if I can't have them, no one will, Um, we've heard many times. But it's important to note that not all display full blown personality disorders diagnosable by clinicians. Um, but traits of narcissism, antisocial behavior are frequently observed. Such traits, including grandiosity, the lack of empathy and remorse, the sense of ownership over one's family, and willingness to violate moral norms. In plainer terms, the family is seen not as loved ones with independent rights, but as extensions of the killer's ego and property. When they no longer conform to their ideals, the disobedient wife or disappointing children, they are disposed of with shocking detachment. Maribel says in one of his confessions was, if one of his confessions was true, did he did it to girls before Shanann got home. He lies so much, though. Lauren says, I think Chris believed Shanann wasn't a good mom, so maybe he thought he was doing um, them some kind of altruistic favor. You know, I've wondered this a lot. Why did Chris Watts, like, how did he justify this in his own head to do what he did? I can't. Like with John List, it's very clear because he wrote a letter to his pastor explaining exactly why he murdered his family, and he really believed those things, or at least um, I believe that he believed those at the time he wrote the letter. I don't think he believed it fully. Um, Cuff You says, I agree, Maribel. After he murdered everybody, he has lied his ass off and lied about the fair, of course. I think that means a fair. Um, yeah, Tony Todd just baffles me. Who's Tony Todd? Because I don't recognize that name. Um, I'm going to have to look this name up, I think. Anyways, I'm going to continue on. So there's also other aspects to kind of the depression, despair, and altruistic filicide. On the other end of the motivational spectrum, some family annihilators are driven by profound despair and suicidal ideation rather than anger or entitlement. In these cases, the perpetrator, typically the father, is often described as despondent, socially isolated, and severely depressed, sometimes with underlying feelings of failure. Rather than lashing out at a partner in rage, this type kills seemingly out of a twisted sense of protection or mercy. A dynamic sometimes called suicide by proxy. And if you guys remember that guy that I showed you the picture of, that's up in a few more slides up ahead, he's the one that coined this suicide by proxy, murder by proxy, and we'll talk about those a little bit more in a little bit. Um, but these individuals, the suicide by proxy, these individuals plan to kill himself due to perceived catastrophes, financial ruin, impending disgrace. The people, the public is going to find out about an affair, but first kills the family to save them from the misery of life without him or without his financial support. There's a perverse altruistic delusion at work here. The perpetrator believes that he is sparing his loved ones from a worse fate, such as poverty, shame, the breakup of a family, or even some apocalyptic event that only he foresees. So, we've been talking about John List already a little bit. So back in 1971, List was an outwardly respectable accountant. He was a devout Lutheran. Um, Secretly, he was facing financial insolvency. He had become obsessed with the idea that his family was drifting into sin. So rather than divorce, file bankruptcy, and get on public welfare, he decided it was better to send his wife, mother, and 3 children to heaven and then kill himself. A plan he ultimately altered by, by escaping instead of suiciding. In his confession letter, List cited concern for his family's souls and their well being. I believe his daughter wanted to go to Hollywood to become an actress, and he was very opposed to that, mostly for um, the faith aspect of that. Um, This this is prototypical of the despondent husband, subtype identified by researchers, typically middle-aged, experiencing perceived irreparable failure, like losing one's job or home, or who commits familicide with, in their mind, benevolent intent of the family's unity in death. As one criminological review explains, when their ability to provide for their family is threatened, they become suicidal and kill their family unit because the family are a part of them. It's more like a limb rather than they're their own individuals. This is done to save the entire family, um, from a life without the offender. Here, the psychological driver is extreme depression coupled with self justifying fantasy that murder is an act of love or rescue. So, um, this is altruism, and it's very, very misguided. Yet, survivor accounts and suicide notes from familicide fathers revealed genuine, if grotesquely distorted, concerns for the victims. Websdale notes in cases where there is no prior history of violence, you're dealing with repressed individuals who are controlled and often depressed. And, I think Chris Watts was controlled and possibly depressed. He was sort of having his little midlife thing where he's, trying to distance himself from his family responsibilities and do all those fun things he never did when he was younger, with his new girlfriend. Um, so let's see. It's a pending life catastrophe like foreclosure or bankruptcy. And there's almost um, let's see. They believe at some level that they're doing their families a favor. I know I keep repeating that, but it's really like the big thing. Like, I don't know how anybody could see killing somebody is doing them a favor. I mean, even if I was like suffering in the street and I was like minutes away from death, if somebody shot me before my time was up, I would be very unhappy. I would rather suffer my last 2 minutes. I mean, that's just, I don't see how, you know what I mean? Um, but let's see. Cuffew says, I completely 100% believe Shanann Watts had the fictitious disorder or Munchausen. Now that's interesting. I try not to get too much into what personality disorders she may have had, but I can see why you might think these things. I'm not going to say you're wrong. I'm just not going to get into it too much, because, first of all, she didn't murder anyone. And even if she was any of those things, she wasn't really, hurting anyone. And if she was hurting her children by making them sick, Chris Watts should have stood up to her and, fixed the problem without murder. And Cuffy says, again, that is no way gives him an excuse to kill her or his girls. And I respect that. There is no excuse. Lauren says, isn't it always amazing to see how these people claim to be, what does that say? Claims here. Isn't always amazing how all these people who claim to be rhymes with pluicidal never. Oh, I see what you're doing. You're trying not to say the word because you don't want it to get blocked, right? Yeah, I don't have any filters, but YouTube has some, so sometimes your comments will get blocked, and I'm sorry for that. A small weed says, Chris Watts could not create a beautiful life, which came second nature to Shanann. He was jealous, and as was Nicole. She thought, I can have your life. That's interesting. In general, the affair, it's not like such a bad thing. Like, I mean, it's bad. It breaks up marriages, it breaks up families. But I mean, as far as like, if you go and looking at a list of terrible things that you could possibly do in this lifetime, that's very low on that list of like the worst things. And it's possible that, had Chris and Shanann gotten a divorce, that Shanann would have been happier too. I mean, and everyone would be alive. So let's see. Maribel says, sounds narcissistic to me. Wyatt Ray Swayas says, because the little girl had peanut allergy. Are you serious? I'm guessing that's towards the Munchausen thing. And yeah. Hey, YouTube streets, how you doing? We're kind of doing a lecture. It's my first lecture in my whole life. So I'm kind of talking about Chris Watts, but I'm also trying to talk about the identifying family annihilators before they annihilate somebody. It's kind of complicated. If you guys haven't been to YouTube, or what is the YouTube streets, you should go watch some of his stuff. I think it's kind of hilarious. He says a lot of things that I would like to say, but I'm afraid to. And it's kind of fun to watch every now and then. Wyatt Ray Sway says, it's just sway. Oh, hey, Wyatt Ray Sway. The U.S. Oh, okay. All right, Wyatt. I'll just call you Wyatt. So, Wyatt is from the U.S. I'm from Alaska. I don't know. Sometimes it feels like it's not part of the U.S. This is very true. Most killers are not right in their mind. Hey, Victoria. But the thing is with most of these killers, if they would have identified that there was a problem in their head, in their hearts, and their, well-being, their whole life, they could actually get help. There is help out there for everyone. And a lot of it's free if you can't afford it. I mean, it's maybe not going to be the best help you can possibly get if you can't, afford the better doctors or whatever, but there's help available. There's people who want to help you. And you don't have to commit these kinds of crimes, but the problem is people don't identify these things. They're not completely right in their mind, in the sense that they understand what they're feeling is wrong. In their mind, it seems perfectly normal and perfectly real, perfectly right, or whatever. Um, it's just, it's not. I hopefully would be able to identify that in myself, and get the help I need if something like that were to happen. Um, so let's get back to this here. Um, It's worth noting that the line between narcissistic rage and despairing altruism is not always clear cut. In some cases, they involve a blend of a man who feels both enraged at his spouse and convinced his children can't live without his mom. Nonetheless, distinguishing the primary psychological motive, the vengeful, controlling versus the suicidal, despairing, is useful for understanding these individual cases. Historically, psychologists have used the terms murder by proxy versus suicide by proxy. And that was coined back in the 70s by Fraser. I can't pronounce his first name, to capture this dichotomy. Murder by proxy refers to killers motivated by anger, revenge. Suicide by proxy refers to those who commit family murder with the pseudo altruistic intent to die and take their loved ones with them to spare them the pain. I know it doesn't make sense to me either. And I do believe I should change these slides, because I definitely have some good stuff here. The types of annihilators. So this is kind of where we're getting into now. Um, Researchers have developed typologies. There's classification schemes for familicide, the perpetrators, as well as identified risk factors and trends. And I don't think we're going to get into it today, but there are actual, um, like, there is a way to identify these, give a number to how likely you're going to get murdered, in various different law enforcement agencies in different states and different countries. I mean, it's all kind of different, but they do have a way to quantify these things. And it's not perfect, but it does help identify it. And I think the big thing for anyone who might be in a situation like this where they could be a potential victim, um, if you're in a domestic relationship that isn't doing well, you need to get help. And you can get out of the situation if you're being abused. If you feel like you're the abuser, there's help for you too. Um, because nobody starts out wanting to murder anybody. So criminologist Parks Dietz was the one who first coined the family annihilator, as I had stated earlier. So I got a trivia question for you guys. Which motive primarily drove John List to annihilate his family? There's a couple choices here on the screen: financial desperation, religious delusions, infidelity, or mental illness. Um, John List meticulously planned the annihilation of his family. As you think about his motive, reflect on what underlying beliefs or pressures could have driven a seemingly normal man. And this man was very normal. His neighbors loved him. He was a kind father up until the point he wasn't. So, what do you guys think? Should I let you guys think for another minute or two, or should we just go on and see what the answer is? Hey, Laurel, I do like hearing opposing views. Also, I think there's a big discussion here, and I think it's important. It's an important discussion, and I don't think that there necessarily needs to be a right answer. But there is things that we can take from this situation into our own lives to help us survive this situation. Or if we see it happening in someone else, maybe we can help them survive. And even if we can't, um, if you see something, say something. If you don't say something, that's a guilt that you're going to have to live with for the rest of your life if something does happen. But if you do say something and it doesn't help, it doesn't make you a bad person. Um, Wyatt, um, I'm going to agree with you and Laurel here, kind of. Um, because technically, this is there is a correct answer, but um, I guess I should have stated it in a way that, which is the biggest reason. So, let me get back to this page. The correct answer is B. Which motive? Religious delusion. John List was profoundly driven by a rigid religious conviction, believing his family was strained morally. This delusion, this delusional belief led him to think that he was saving them from spiritual ruin, showcasing how dangerous distorted thinking can become when left unchecked. Now, the only reason why A is partially right is because this was a significant stressor in his life. He had lost his job. He was an accountant. Without a job, he was living in a up-to-do neighborhood, and he pretended to go to work every day for months. But his daughter was also on her way to becoming a Hollywood harlot. He thought her moral compass was completely wrong, and she was going to go be an actress and somehow become a whore or something. And that was a major fight that they had. um and it is the number one reason why that family got murdered. The number two reason is the financial desperation. So I guess it is a trick question, guys. It is both A and B. um So let's get into this murder by proxy versus suicide by proxy. Um, this is a really interesting, like, I could spend an hour just talking about these two things. I've kind of covered most of it already. So I think I've already said this. It occurs when murder by proxy are individuals kill their children primarily to inflict severe emotional pain and suffering upon the surviving spouse. I don't think I said that. That is something that can definitely happen when you're talking about domestic violence in general. Parents will use the kids as a weapon. And one thing that one parent can do to hurt the other parent is hurt the children. Um, it's essentially an act of revenge. Um, Suicide by proxy. This is when they genuinely believe that they are protecting their family by murdering them. And again, this makes absolutely no sense to me at all. Like, I can't, there's no like partial, like, I don't know. I mean, I can't rationalize it. Even like, say there's a nuclear fallout and, we were going to suffer for the next 4 months before we, slowly die. I wouldn't kill my family to prevent that. Even I would, who knows what could happen, the day after you murder them to save them from the suffering. There could be a drug that comes out that, like, you know, replenishes all the atoms from your body and you're healthy again. I don't know. I think it's everyone's right to live as long as they possibly can. So, this is something that I find very interesting, that the gender in almost all family annihilation stories, they're 90 to 95% males. And if you notice the little sticky notes here, I talk about Aubrey Ann Moore, who is a female who murdered her family. And I also mentioned stay at home dads. One of the big stressors for family annihilations is having that financial burden. And I think now um, men are actually staying home with their children more and more. I had the actual statistics up earlier and I lost them. Um, but I want to say it was something like 2 or 3% back in the 80s. And now it's up to maybe like almost 20% of males are actually no longer the breadwinners of their family. They're actually the stay at home fathers. And I think that they are going to be in the next 10 to 20 years. I think we're going to see more and more female family annihilators, um, especially if you just think about the actual stressors that happen that cause these events, the financial things. If the woman is making the money and then they're facing bankruptcy, the same scenario could ultimately, play out. If there's an affair and a financial thing, like that's even a bigger risk. Um, but I think it's still important to mention it that female family annihilators are extremely rare. And I say this up until this point in our history, this is true and it's still true. Um, but they often have distinct contexts, such as severe postpartum psychosis, or in rare instances, a mother who kills children to spite the father. And that is the murder by proxy scenario that we just mentioned. So these are the known patterns. And I think we're going to be running out of time. I guess um, let me check the comments section here, guys. Um, Cuffew asked, who is the lady that killed her children and then jumped out of the second story window trying to kill herself? I cannot think of her name. I am not familiar with that one. The woman, let me see. Did I? Yeah, I don't know if you can see the information on the sticky note. Aubrey Ann Moore was a single mother to 3 children. Elena, age 2, Cassidy, 6, and Kyrie, age 8. In February 18th, 2019, Aubrey Ann shot and killed her 3 children before turning the gun on herself. This is a terrible thing. I've heard of at least a couple other scenarios did exact same thing with a gun. Guns, I don't know why anybody would need a gun unless they're hunting. Um, but so yeah, let's get back to these patterns. But let me just go back here and check the chat before we go too far ahead. Lauren says Elaine Champion did that. She drowned her kids. Oh, I missed something. Oh man, I remember when I was a kid hearing about women who drove their cars with their children in them into the water and drowned them. Um, and let's see. Wyatt says, yeah, I did a report on John List a few years ago. A small weed says, ritual sacrifice and deep, dark, magical workings. Okay, that's interesting. That could probably play a factor in this. I'm sure I missed something in the chat for I'm not sure where that comment came from, but the magical thinking all in its own is a psychologically, it's a clinical diagnosis. It does exist. I can't remember what it's called. I almost said histrionic. Um, now I got to look it up. I'm sorry. I'm a curious person. That's funny. I type in magical and magical thinking personality disorder just pops up. Schizotypical personality disorder. I'm sure you guys have heard of like schizoaffective and all these schizo things. I'm pretty sure schizo is another word for psycho in everyday slang. In schizotypical personality disorders, there's a cognitive experiences reflect more of a florid departure from reality. Ideas of reference, paranoid ideas, bodily illusions, and magical thinking. And I know what you guys are all thinking of. All those people who talk about, um, you know, believing in different things. I don't think that that's necessarily a personality disorder. But when you're driving down the interstate or you're driving through a neighborhood, say going 130 miles an hour, and you're live streaming with your kids unbuckled in the back seat, and you're saying, I'm safe because God is protecting me. That's kind of what they're talking about with the magical thinking. Um, belief in like tarot cards predicting, astrology predictions and things like that is magical thinking in a way, but um, it's kind of harmless, I think, for most people. I'm sure that it could be. Susan Smith, Lauren. Wyatt says Susan Smith, and Cuff You says, yep, that was Susan Smith. Um, and there was a jinx. That's some magical thinking out there, Cuff You. I'm just messing with you. Um, so yeah. Let me get back into my presentation. I'm kind of skipping some stuff. Like this is a 25-page paper. It's like 12,000 words. And I thought I was going to make like 20 slides and be done. And I think it's going to end up being like 60 slides. I only made 20 today. And I do have to end this in about 25 minutes or so. But I want to get into the types of family annihilators. So Dietz's mass murder typology. The criminologist, he was a criminologist who, as I said before, coined the term family annihilator. In his schema, the family annihilator is a person, usually the male, who kills his entire family, distinguished from other mass murderers like pseudo commandos who attack the public or spree killers. Dietz's early observations set the stage for treating these cases as a distinct phenomenon. So when you think about killers, there's a couple different things that can happen. Most people think of murder as either hot-blooded or cold-blooded. Hot-blooded, your spouse is cheating on you and one thing leads to another and somebody is dead. That people can understand more than they can understand somebody like Ted Bundy, who goes up to strangers and just takes them out. He flashes a smile, he gets them to help him do something, and the next thing they know, they've gotten hit in the head with something and they're half unconscious in his car about to be murdered. Melinda says she is a member of OTO. why you think Daddy-O was overseeing the amount of phone calls post-event was very telling. I actually looked into the OTO because I heard this rumor a lot, and I can't find any like real reason to believe that this could even be a little bit true. Um, and if you look at the OTO, at least on the basic public level, it is a secret society that people know about. It is hard to get into. They do have various levels or degrees that, you get to learn a little bit more, the higher you go. Um, but, being secretive, the list of its members isn't going to be public. And I can't find anything from I don't know where the rumor came from, to be honest. Nobody, I did, as far as I can see, nobody has said, "Oh, Nicole Kessinger was with me at this OTO meeting," and blah blah blah. You know, I think, I also heard that she owned some kind of magic shop, which she didn't own any business, as far as I know. And I think she might have, been like me and curious, watching TikTok, watching those tarot card readers, maybe asking a question or two of my own. But I did see somebody from TikTok say that, yeah, I talked to Nicole Kessinger regularly. She was always blah blah blah, whatever. I don't know if I believe that either. Just because they say it doesn't make it true. I can't prove it. I just know that there's a lot of weird, suspicious rumors regarding Nicole Kessinger, and I'd like to believe, I really want to believe that most of them are not true. Um, I really hope she didn't do anything to those children. I really hope that she didn't threaten to leave Chris, and that's how this whole thing happened. I mean, all of the things that I have thought could have happened, but I'm trying my best um, to believe that she didn't, or hopefully she didn't. And if she did, she will be found out eventually. The stands for the Otis Templariendo or something like that. Um, but it's a satanic cult. It's an actual satanic organization. Um, they actually worship the devil. But I think, at least in their public stuff, there's no murder. There's no like, they don't murder babies on a certain day of the summer to, become prosperous and things like you see in the movies. Um, so let's see. Wyatt says, I don't see it, but I feel sure she escaped from a white hot sect because Fred Holy, not sure what you guys are talking about, had deputies guarding him and her while she was unaccounted for. The prosecutor adopted the kid. I think I missed something in this. Victoria says she lied and got away with that. Laurel says she did own a yoga studio. See, I can't even find that yoga studio. Like, what was it called? Where was it located? I mean, there should be some public records stating that she owned something or at least rented it, right? You guys are talking about Diane Downs, and I'm not familiar with her. Most Satanists don't worship the devil. I don't even know what hedonism is, but from what I read from the OTO's like personal, like, basic page, they don't like sacrifice things. They don't do blood rituals and whatnot. But I think there's a lot of sex things that happen, and things like that. And I don't know. I've watched a lot of hedonism. I'll have to look it up. But yeah, because I heard some rumors too, many times that, the day that the kids were murdered was specific to some religious thing. And I don't think the 18th is, but it is sort of close to like the solstices. So I guess somebody could have like got the idea from that. Well, it's close, but I don't know. I don't buy into most of that stuff. I listen to it out of curiosity, but I just can't allow myself to believe some of these rumors. And if they all ended up being true, and it could be proven with 100% certainty, I would acknowledge that. That maybe I was wrong, but so, yeah, let's talk about these typologies. So, we talked about Dietz's mass murder. We've talked a little bit about Fraser, the murder by proxy versus suicide by proxy already. Um, let's see. There's Wilson, Daly, and Danielle from the 90s. An important study of familicide in the mid 90s looked at cases of fathers killing spouses and children. They noted that many such killers fit into the same two broad categories: motivated by anger and revenge, and often tied to marital breakdown and jealousy. Those motivated and those motivated by despondency, often tied to financial or social failure. Um, and I think they may have just restated these things because that's exactly what Fraser talked a lot about. And what happens a lot uh, is these ideas have always been around or possibly been around, partially described. Somebody describes them better, and then they get absorbed into everything. So, like the understanding of the workings of the mind is a fluid thing. It isn't, you know, always exactly this. And I think whatever helps you understand it um, is fine. You just got to also realize that it's not always black and white. It could be like, the actual diagnosis of somebody could be like 7 or 8 different things at various different degrees of something. And it's not just a label narcissist personality disorder. There could be many things. And depending on the level of study that the doctor you went to, you're going to either be um, put into one simple category, or it's going to be, if you go to a better doctor who actually understands more, they're going to have you in a bigger several categories. Um, and it's not like a broken arm where you can see the type of fracture, um, physically see it. It's there's a lot of things that come into play, and one of them is, what is the person saying? But then you also got to take in your own observations, and and it's I don't think that there's anyone who's ever been diagnosed with anything that's been absolutely, proven beyond a doubt, because you never know if the people who are telling these things to these doctors are telling them accurately. Maybe they don't even understand these things themselves, and they try to, and it comes out, they're talking about, something, and it comes out like the color blue, right? But the real color is like more of a turquoise with a little hint of lavender or something. And that's just a kind of a way to kind of describe something that, is it's blue, or is it like this, other label of a different shade of blue? Um, but let's see, where was I? So Yardley, Wilson, and Lenz in 2013 came up with 4 profiles, and they're from the UK. They analyzed and researched for 32 years of British cases, and proposed 4 distinct types of family annihilators. And see, this one is the one that I agree with the most, and I can see being more accurate. The self-righteous, these are the ones that blame the spouse um, for the collapse of the family. This killer often seeks to punish the partner. This is your fault. That kind of scenario. His identity is strongly tied to being the breadwinner. He feels he feels the partner's actions of leaving him or destroying the family have caused the situation. A father who tells his estranged wife, "See what you made me do," when he kills the kids, you know. But you got to also think about the domestic violence part of this, because a lot of times before they get to the killing part, they get, hit or punched or kicked or something thrown at them. "See what you made me do." Um, I hate hearing that. There's also, so there's a self-righteous, there's the disappointed. This one feels the family has let him down by not living up to his ideals or expectations. This could be due to children not following his values on religious or cultural values, or a wife not fulfilling the role as he envisioned it. It's a sense of betrayal. I gave you everything and you turned out wrong. This type may align with the cases of honor killings or culturally driven familicides, where the murderer is disappointed in a perceived moral lapse. The anomic. And, every time I say this word, I feel like most people don't know what it means. And I don't have a very good definition of it. I know what it means in this context. Um, let's see. Wow. There is no, it's a form of aphasia. Um, that is not, I don't know. Like sometimes Google is just wrong. Um, a state of social instability. The term anomic refers to a state of social inability resulting from a breakdown of standards and values. It's often associated with the feelings of personal unrest, alienation, and uncertainty due to a lack of purpose or ideals. The concept was introduced by the French socialist Emile Durkheim in his studies on social cohesion and suicide. So, this anomic type of family annihilator sees the family as tied to his economic success. With when finances crumble, the family is, in his warped view, no longer worth continuing. In prosperous times, the family was a symbol of his achievement. In failure, they become a reminder of shame. The paranoid family annihilator believes an outside force is poised to harm the family, and convinces himself that killing them, taking their life is a form of protection. As discussed, this involves delusions or quasi delusional thinking. The authorities are going to take my kids, so they better die by my hand than suffer somewhere else. There is often evidence of mental instability with these types, though it's not always full psychosis. These categories often overlap. Um, they, but they do help illustrate the killer's primary narrative. Notably, the researchers pointed out that all four types go beyond the traditional ideals of revenge or altruistic murders, meaning family annihilators can't all be simply shoved into a couple of boxes. For instance, the disappointed category isn't purely revenge or altruism. It's more about a distorted idealism. I'd rather kill them than see them stray from our faith. The self-righteous type has revenge elements, but specifically fixates blame on the spouse. The anomic has the altruistic shades mixed with personal shame. Um, Liam and Reichleman back in 2014 talked about empirical clusters. And I don't think I'm going to get into this one today because I'm running out of time, but it's very interesting. If you guys want to Google something, look up, or I'll put it in the chat. Um, Here, look this guy up and check it out. It's definitely worth talking about. I just want to talk about a few other things more. So these are the patterns, and we've kind of covered all of them. I know you guys have been looking at this slide for a little while now. This man is a well-known wrestling star from WCW before it became WWE or whatever. This man murdered his family, and he is a family annihilator. And let me see if I could just kind of go through. Oops, what did I do? Oh no. Oops. I just broke it. Sorry. Where was I? There we go. So, in June of 2007, professional wrestler Chris Benoit tragically killed his wife and 7-year-old son before committing suicide. This murder was mostly attributed to kind of a roid rage. So it was medication induced or drug induced, however you want to look at it. But there we go. I can read a little better now. So Benoit's history of severe brain trauma from repeated concussions sustained during his wrestling career. So, as I was saying, some think that it was some sort of roid rage, but it could have also been, if you've watched the movie Concussion, that talks about football players with head injuries becoming this super aggressive person. It could be from his repeated concussions during his career as a professional wrestler. He did test negative for anabolic steroids at the time. The event brought heightened attention to the dangers of repeated head injuries in sports. Methods and weapons. The method often reflects availability. In countries with high gun ownerships, like in the US, firearms are frequently used. In one US sample, firearms were the most common weapon in family mass murders. In countries with strict gun control, like UK, you see other methods. The UK study found stabbing 32% of cases, and carbon monoxide poisoning, car exhaust, was 15%, as well as arson or blunt force trauma. The choice of method can sometimes reflect the narrative. Example would be like carbon monoxide in a car might be chosen by an altruistic father as a way to peacefully put the family to sleep. Stabbing might be more common in crimes of rage. Location and timing. These murders almost always occur at home or at another family residence, typically in single episode, so they don't repeat murder. Many happen on weekends, particularly Sunday, and during summer months when the family time is the highest. UK data showed August and Sundays were overrepresented. That's a little side note. The reason the reasoning proposed during holidays, weekends, fathers, especially estranged ones, have access to children and time off work. Also, perhaps a symbolic notion of end of the weekend when the kids must be returned in custody cases. Um, Familicide knows no boundaries. Status, fame, or success offers no immunity. The tragic case of this professional wrestler, Chris Benoit, is a chilling reminder that this can emerge from any hidden turmoil. Um, let's see. Check the comments again. Kind of running out of time here, guys. I guess I'll go a little bit longer. I'm almost through my slides, and then I'll be happy because I spent the last like 3 days working on this, and I felt like I didn't do enough, which is funny because I've already almost been talking for 2 hours. So I'm just looking back through the comments. Maribel says, "Do a part 2 and 3. This is fascinating. I might. I do have a lot more to say." But it just gets more and more detailed. This is kind of like the overview, but there is important information here, guys, and I think everyone needs to know this. I think that studying true crime may not prevent murders, but it might prepare you to how to react in a situation. I mean, if you're in a situation where things are getting bad, you might have watched the Chris Watts case or followed it and see the signs of something similar is happening in your own life. And then you might think twice and actually get out before it's too late. Wyatt says it's a great presentation. Maria says it's very interesting. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate that. I've been wanting to do this for a long time, and I know this is a lot of information, and I don't find it boring, but I think that other people might. So that's why I haven't done it. It always gets so like heavy that I don't know. I try to present it in a way that you can kind of get it, but you really have to dive in deeper to get the real knowledge of this stuff. Wyatt says it's like Dr. John says, we study true crime to better understand society. I think that's true. I don't study it because I want to know, better methods of murder or something. I don't want to know the gory details. In fact, I try to do my best to kind of skip over that part because I don't like it. It doesn't make me feel good. And, but I do like to try to understand, well, why did this happen? How can it be prevented in the future? And Wyatt says, yeah, we're not here to glorify true crime. We're here for true crime to learn, not to glorify it. Yeah, that's very well said. Victoria says, it's good to know these things for awareness. I agree. And Olga says, it's a great presentation. Thanks, guys. Where was I? So the precipitating events. Oh, did I do it again? Can you guys still see that? Yeah. So a large majority either commit suicide or attempted at the scene. In the UK study, again, 81% attempted suicide. In the US homicide suicide data, the percentage is also high. Those who do not kill themselves often either flee and or try to cover up the crime. Or sometimes they surrender to the police or they get caught. Very few engage in standoffs, that suicide by cop scenario. The victims, by definition, they are the killer's intimate family. Usually it's the current spouse, partner, and their own children. Sometimes it's in laws or the killer's own parents are collateral victims if they live in a household, in the household, or happen to be present at the time. John List also killed his 85-year-old mother who lived with them, possibly to save her from the grief. And, there are other killers who have said something similar. Um, oh, shoot, what is his name? Uh, Ed, not Gein, the other Ed. Um, wow, I'm drawing a blank. Um, Kemper, Edmund Kemper, um, said he murdered his grandmother, which is technically familicide, also. But he murdered his grandfather because he felt sorry for the guy and didn't want him to suffer the loss of his wife. And it's kind of a scary the way these people think. So I know we've talked a lot about John List already, but I kind of wanted to point out all of the basic facts as best as I can. And I'm kind of out of time, but I'm going to kind of read through this. The despondent, family values, killer. The despondents, family values killer. This happened in New Jersey, 1971. John List was a 46-year-old accountant and a devout Lutheran. In November of 1971, I know we just said it, this stuff usually happens in the summer and on Sundays, but in this case it didn't. And he was also, I think the average is 30 in their 30s, and he's above that average. He's in his late 40s. He methodically executed his wife and 3 teenage children and his elderly mother in their home. He wrote a 5-page letter to his pastor explaining his actions and vanished. The bodies weren't discovered for a month. He had turned the lights on and turned on music in the house as he departed calmly. List remained a fugitive for 18 years until he was finally identified and arrested in 1989. In his letter and later interviews, List cited multiple motives: severe financial distress. He had lost his job and he was hiding this from his family. His desire to save his family's soul. He feared the late 70s moral decay, and that his family was straying from their faith. His own his own depression and shame. He claimed that he didn't kill himself because suicide is a sin. What do you think murder is? Right? I don't get it. One sin's okay, but the other one's not okay, I guess, according to him. It's a paradoxical coda to his horrific actions. Clinically, List represents the anomic depressive type. He saw his family's worth as intertwined with his role as a provider. It was also altruistic, religious rationale. They'd go to heaven together if he murdered them rather than allow them to become sinners. And this was mostly brought about because his daughter wanted to move to Hollywood. He did not have any known prior violences. By all accounts, he was a rigid but not abusive father. The shock in his community was immense. He was that quiet church-going fellow who no one imagined was capable of such violence. When captured and tried, List was diagnosed by experts with obsessive compulsive personality disorder, a rigid perfectionist personality type, and possible depression, but notably not psychotic. He was found sane and sentenced to life in prison, where he died in 2008. John List case is often cited in literature as a textbook familicide driven by financial catastrophe, shame, and a perverse sense of righteousness. The judge at his trial said John Emil List is without remorse and without honor. The judge said that. This man, by all accounts, hid in plain sight. Oh, I forgot to change the picture in this one. The other case that we're all familiar with is the Chris Watts case. The modern psychopathic annihilator, Colorado, 2018. Chris Watts was a 33-year-old oil company worker who in August of 2018 murdered his wife, Shanann, who was 15 weeks pregnant, and their two young daughters, Bella, who was 4, and Celeste, who was 3. Unlike List, Watts did not plan to die. Instead, he concocted a clumsy cover story that his wife and kids had gone missing. He even gave a TV interview feigning concern. Within days, inconsistencies in his story and forensic evidence and his own partial confession led to his arrest. Watts ultimately admitted to strangling his wife and smothering his daughters, then disposing of his daughters' bodies in oil tanks where he worked. The motive, by Watts's later admission and the prosecutor's case, was that he wanted to start a new life with his mistress and didn't want the burden of his current family. This case exemplifies the selfishness and the control aligning with what Dr. Burrill called psychopathic antisocial personality types. Watts had no known history of violence. Neighbors and friends described him as mild-mannered. His mother believed he was henpecked husband who went along with everything he was told to do. But internally, he harbored resentment and the selfish desire for freedom. There was no sign of depression or altruism. This was cold, instrumental murder of a man who saw his family as disposable inconveniences. Psychologically, Watts demonstrates the family annihilator for the self-gain profile. Fully aware of the wrongfulness, yet convinced he could eliminate his family and get away with it. From a clinical perspective, none of it is understandable or justifiable, but it's also the most frightening because they know perfectly well what they're doing. Watts's demeanor, even the morning after the murder, is captured on police body cam. He appeared eerily calm. I know all of you guys know this case very well, and we've all watched this footage and we've all made the same comments. And, I remember seeing this on the news the first day it happened, and I had thought, I changed the channel. He murdered his family, and I didn't want to hear anymore because I already knew what had happened. It's really hard to hear about people who murder people, especially people that they're supposed to be protecting. It really bothers me. So comparing these two cases, I think we've kind of covered this already. The anomic, self-righteous versus Chris Watts's spousal revenge, selfish, wanting a new life scenario. And the real question is, can we predict or prevent family annihilation? And that would be the last slide. The answer to that question isn't simple. There are tools, and I've got a lot of information on those tools that different agencies use to determine how likely someone is to become a victim of lethal harm. Um, but it's like another 10 pages of stuff. So I'm kind of losing my voice already, I think. But I don't know. What do you guys think? Was it worth your time to kind of go through this stuff? Did you learn anything? I think I've heard of Christian Longo, but I don't remember the face. I do remember the face. I don't remember the story or the name. Christian Longo was from Michigan, 93. At the age of 19, he married 23-year-old Mary Jane Baker. They had 3 children. Longo and his family encountered financial difficulties due to his reckless spending habits. They had lived in Newport, Oregon. Christian was employed at a local Starbucks, while Mary Jane was a stay at home mother. She was also a Jehovah's Witness and active in their local Kingdom Hall. By all accounts, the two devoted their time to raising their 3 young children. At the time of the murders, the couple had been married for 8 years. You know, this story probably didn't make national news because of this was a poor family. One person working at a Starbucks isn't going to support a family. It just really isn't. And people can survive on limited funds. It's just very hard. Yeah, Chris Coleman is an interesting story. Um, the thing that really makes his story stand out compared to Chris Watts, they both had a plan, or even Scott Peterson, they had a plan. And I know some people might think Scott Peterson is not guilty. I don't know that I agree with that yet. But I've seen the new information that's coming out on Scott Peterson, and some people think that he might actually be innocent. But these killers that have a plan, like Chris Watts had a plan, but it wasn't as detailed as Chris Coleman's. Chris Coleman was getting death threats for his family for like over 6 months. They were death threats like the threats that he got on a regular basis, targeting the his employer. Um, what was it? Something Faith Ministries. I can't remember off the top of my head. But he worked for a very large evangelistical church. Um, and so he would get these threats targeting towards the woman. But so he got the idea that he would do something similar, and he started sending emails to himself, um, making threats to his family. And his plan was to murder his family. And then he was going to go to work out, and then he's going to try to call his family. Nobody's going to answer. And then that's going to be reason enough for him to call 911 because of those threats. Yeah, he was head of security for, oh my God, what's her name? Something like, I want to say like, I can't say, I don't know. Um, maybe something, I just guess I have to look. Joyce Mayer Ministries. Yeah. So this case happened in 2009. But it's really a tragic story also. But anyways, guys, I think that's going to be it for tonight. I may or may not continue this one right away. But if you guys really want me to do more, after this is over, go into the comment section and just let me know some specific things that you want to talk about in the next one, and I can get it prepared. And we can do a deeper dive, and maybe we can even reflect more on different cases, and look at the small details that you may not have noticed before, and see how the psychology applies a little better. But Maribel wants a part 2 and 3. I think there really could be a part 2 and 3. Whenever I don't know, I intended this to be like a 1-hour thing, and then the more I wrote, the more I was like, well, I can't just stop there. I gotta talk about this too and talk about that. But I think if this was a long form video, there's a lot of editing I would have to do on the stuff that I was talking about, to take out a little bit of the redundancies. But when you're explaining this stuff, you really got to drive that information home so that it can be understood a little bit better. Because I just don't think we all get all of this stuff. I don't even think I understand it fully. I think I understand it fairly well, but yeah, Maria was Joyce Mayer, Meyers, Joyce Mayer's ministry, and I believe they're still around. And they kind of just talked about it as like, this wasn't supposed to happen. We have rules against this, and it just never was brought up again. I'm really surprised they survived something like that happening with their head of security. I think that their rules on, adultery was too strict, and that was a stressor, that probably the big stressor that caused all of this to happen for that family was that rule at his job. If Chris Coleman had gotten a divorce, he would have had to leave his job. And I think he was prior military with, I guess he could have probably found another security job, but it probably wouldn't have been as easy. And he wouldn't have liked it as much. And it may not have paid as much either. But anyways, guys, yeah, if you want more, let me know in the comment section after we leave here tonight. Just write some actual questions, things that you want to discuss, maybe something you want to compare something to, and we can definitely talk about this in more detail. But once again, guys, thanks. I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. Good night, guys. Let's see. Yeah. What do I usually say? Oh, yeah. Stay kind, be vigilant, and always question the truth. I'll catch you in the next video. Sorry, I just had to say that. I haven't said it in a while. My son is doing his YouTube thing, and he's trying to come up with a catchphrase, and so I feel like I have to say it for him. But anyways, guys, have a good night.